Naval transport bearing 407 Korean prisoners of war docks at San Francisco amid scenes of emotion.
The end of two hard-fought wars and the rise of Elvis provided a much-needed rest for the country.
Good evening, folks, and a hearty welcome to our drive-in theater.
This innocent period of rest evolved into a slowly building rebellion, presaging a challenging and divisive decade ahead. The momentous Brown versus Board of Education decision of the Supreme Court in 1954, striking down separate but equal schools for African American students, was the beginning of a new frontier, one that would stress our nation in ways we could not anticipate.
There's other schools they can put these children in.
Although a handful of southern school districts integrated in the 1950s, it was not until 1960 that our country as a whole began focusing on school integration, when 6-year-old Ruby Bridges was enrolled in an all-white New Orleans public school. 2 years later, James Meredith's enrollment at Ole Miss introduced the same struggle to a recalcitrant Southern state college system.
Whenever oppressed people stand up for their rights, the initial response of the oppressor is bitterness. We hope that the end will be redemption and reconciliation rather than a division.
In parallel, Martin Luther King's escalating battle for black civil rights was quickly building momentum across the country, at lunch counters, on buses, and through bus strikes. Yet time seemingly stood still at Lawrenceville. In the early 1960s, despite the fact that many peer schools and colleges had started enrolling blacks 20 years earlier, a reluctant board of trustees would proclaim no qualified black students had stepped forward. A small but growing contingent of board members and alumni had begun pushing for integration. Lawrenceville history teacher Chris Schulte wrote her master's thesis on the early black students and integration at Lawrenceville.
The pressure was growing. Bruce McClellan seemed favorable to it, and events on the national stage were advancing with desegregation all over the place and other schools integrating throughout the country.
Questions about Lawrenceville's position were increasing. Still, the concept of change did not come easily to the board. Then a new constituency joined the mix.
So there was also student pressure to integrate the school as well. So I think that all of those forces kind of came together to say, okay, well, let's see if there's somebody around who would want to come. We will allow the student to enter.
A few weeks later, Jim Thompson, class of 1948, and an alumni admissions interviewer, met Lyles Battle, the 13-year-old son of a co-worker, a State Department secretary. Battle's mother, Virginia, recalls her conversation with Thompson.
Jim said to me, I met your son Lyles. That was nice meeting him. He's a very alert young man. I'm on the board of the Lawrenceville School in New Jersey, and they've never had a black student. Do you think Lyles would be interested in attending? I said, I don't know, we'll ask him. So of course when we asked him, he said, oh yeah, I'd be willing. So the procedure started, and as it ended up, he came to Lawrenceville and was one of the first black students. And we never regretted his coming.
Towards the end, my mother, being the politician that she is, you know you're gonna be the only black that's there. So they did tell me, okay? But the focus was not necessarily on that. The focus was on the fact that I was going to be getting a much better education. I really didn't understand, and probably it's a good thing, the enormity of what I was doing. My focus was on doing well and being successful and graduating.
Having found its first black student, the school moved ahead.
If you contrast it with how they decided to go co-ed, with the decision to go co-ed with a committee to look into, well, what are going to be the needs of the girls? What do we have to build? How should we integrate it? My sense of the decision to accept blacks was like, okay, we'll do it now under this pressure, and here's a candidate, but none of that kind of preparation. So Lyles Battle shows up and, okay, we have this black student, and here we go.
Congress passes the most sweeping civil rights bill ever to be written into the law.
Its purpose is not to divide, but to end divisions, divisions which have lasted all too long.
Just 2 months after President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Lyles joined Hamill as a sophomore, arriving on campus in early September for preseason football practice. As Lyles and his parents pulled up in front of Upper, temporary quarters for the team that week, they described the scene as some 30 football players sat on the upper esplanade.
And they were like all out there talking.
So when your dad let you out the car, the whole group of students went,
eyes right. And there was a look on their face like, I will never forget that for as long as I live. And they were like, who in God's name is this? And we've been laughing about that though ever since, right?
Oh, yeah. Right.
Oh, yeah. We've been laughing about that ever since.
It was quite an introduction.
Yeah, it was.
But it was worth it.
It was. Because obviously they didn't know that I was coming. They had no idea that I was coming, okay? They really didn't.
Lyles was not the only African American who would join the student body in 1964. A 13-year-old day student from Trenton named Darrell Fitzgerald was lower school bound.
It was very weird to come in, walk through Cromwell and not see another African American, go across the hall to Thomas, none, go down to Ross and come back through Davidson and say, I'm by myself.
Feelings of isolation were common among early black students, as only 1 or 2 new African Americans would enroll each year for the next decade, tied to the availability of financial aid. But blacks were hardly uncommon on campus. The dining room, laundry, and maintenance staffs were almost entirely black staffed, primarily with white supervisors.
I remember going in there, to introduce myself and making friends with them and how proud they were. I mean, they were really proud that, finally since 1810, there was somebody like them at the school.
Sometimes when I wanted a snack, I could go down to the cafeteria and get a little something to eat, okay? Or if I needed an extra blanket or a pillow or whatever, I got taken care of.
Much like today, the insular lives of lower and circle students rarely overlapped. But only a week into the new school year in 1964, the worlds collided.
I look out and I see an African-American kid. And he sees me and literally we started almost running to each other and came up to him and I, said, my name's Darrell. He said, my name is Lyles. And I'll never forget the conversation. It was like, hey man, so have you seen anybody else? And he said, no, brother, I think it's just you and me. And I said, you kidding? He said, no, man, I think so.
He was the only other black student on campus. And then, of course, it was great when Rudy Ashford came and Simon Love. And, we kind of had a bond because we were so isolated from everybody else. But our friendship became a support system for each other.
It would take 40 years for Darrell to learn that one generous alumnus had made his education and many others possible.
Henry Woods stepping up and writing that check to pay for 4 years for me was huge, changed my life, and I will never forget, and every day I thank him, for what he did, for us.
In 1967, Lawrenceville hired its first black teacher, Roland Hentz, who left after only 1 year for Columbia University. Months later, Max Maxwell joined the faculty. He and his wife would provide much-needed community and continuity for black students over the next 30 years. The Maxwells lived across Route 206 from Upper, in Maple House.
The kids who came over there didn't come for English instruction. They came to talk to my wife and, in a sense, have some comfort because I don't think a lot of them had a tremendously pleasant experience in the first years at Lawrenceville.
So what was common to their experiences were the sense that they received a wonderful education. There was also the sense that there were many faculty members of different, white and black, who were their lifelines, essentially, who supported them and helped them to get through it. They also talked about the psychic cost to coming here.
Bob Ainsback and Sam Harding were just some of the housemasters who worked extra hard to make black students' lives easier. Still, many described the isolation of being the only African-American student in an entire house or form, adding to the already challenging, high testosterone-charged environment of an all-male boarding school.
I had gotten into a verbal altercation with one of the kids here in campus. He had called me the N-word. And so I said, well, let's take this outside, which was the way that, we settled things back in the day. And so we went outside and squared off and, got it out of our system. And I didn't have any more problems with him. And I didn't have any more problems with anybody else.
Gary Friday joined Lower School in 1965 after attending some of the top integrated schools in Philadelphia. Gary confronted a different brand of racism.
They would tell me that I was, an exception. So I would say, back then, well, I'm not really an exception, I'm pretty much, normal black kid, and maybe your perceptions are, what are wrong. And they talked about assimilation, said, well, why don't you want to be assimilated, into our society? And I said, well, there's differences and the differences are good.
All the black students we spoke with from the early years were keenly aware of race and class distinction. But despite the hardships, they kept their focus on fulfilling their parents' dreams. Gary says his education gave him the confidence and discipline to fare well in college and later in medical school. Gary's stepdaughter graduated from Lawrenceville in 2010. His daughter will graduate in 2016, and his son is class of 2018.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
The flow of black students increased dramatically in the late 1970s thanks to Bruce McClellan's commitment to adding students from A Better Chance, one of several organizations that identify and prepare gifted students from underserved neighborhoods. Sam Washington, class of 1981, was one of those students.
All I knew were black people. I was literally dropped off here and it was like being, transported from Earth to somewhere very far away. It was different in terms of the people, what they looked like, the culture, social class. Every part of this school was foreign to me. I found, home on the basketball team in Mr. Maxwell's living room and just with the other black students here. So we spent a lot of time together because most of us were coming from similar backgrounds.
The growing numbers strained the Maxwell's living room, so the students found a second home base, the Black Student Society.
The BSS at that time was a place for the kids to escape, in a sense, from any stress that might be generated by other things in the school. The bathhouse became their clubhouse.
Mark Griffith arrived at Lawrenceville a year after Sam in 1977. He says that within the Lawrenceville black community, Lyles and Darrell were heroic figures, akin to our country's founding fathers.
Things were pretty damn easy compared to, I can't imagine what it would have been like to be 1 or 2 or 3 black students on campus. But I have to tell you, that mirrors the history of black people in this country. At every step of the way, in every institution, no matter what's going on across the country, there have always been people who have been those trailblazers who have gone out there and knew that they had just had to grin and bear it, or they had to fight back. They had to do whatever it took to survive because they knew that other people were going to be coming after them.
In 1980, Mark would be elected the school's first black president.
There were a lot of questions about who I was representing, who I was going to speak for, and how I was going to manage those worlds. I don't think I ever completely got it right through my whole year there, but it was a case of improvisation. If we know anything about black history, we know anything about black students at Lawrenceville, we know it's all about improvisation.
The muddle-through approach was how the school approached race for many years.
There was no plan and no structure, and there was no anticipation of what the response might be or what the needs might be. Just, it was like an experiment.
Marcus Mabry enrolled in September of 1981, with early memories of visiting his stepfather's mother in Circle House kitchens where she worked.
I'd never been in this world that was very rich, very affluent, and very white. I'd come from Trenton and Hamilton, in the black parts of Hamilton Township. Had grown up on and off welfare, in and out of housing projects, and so my world was quite the opposite of the Lawrenceville world.
But Marcus did not seek refuge among the 30-plus black students enrolled in the 1980s.
Certainly, I didn't hang black, only hang with the black kids on campus. I didn't do that. I knew I was at Lawrenceville to soak up all these opportunities, and that's what I was determined to do. My friends were kind of the other kids who excelled academically, whether they were black, white, Asian, or otherwise.
In 1999, Sam Washington returned to Lawrenceville, devoting his career to building a more open and accepting culture on campus.
It's not a single culture school where it's a white culture where we ask others to kind of adapt to this culture, where we create an environment where no matter where you come from, we have kids from 40 different countries where they all fit in and feel equally valued, represented, where everybody fits in.
Diversity within the school's black community has made considerable headway. Marcus Mabry joined the Lawrenceville Board in 2007 and chairs the Admissions and Financial Aid Committee.
The African American community itself is more diverse today economically than we were when I was in school. And so there are lots of middle class and upper class black kids who are not scholarship kids like I was.
Attention has also turned in the last 2 years to raising $36 million to support primarily middle class families previously not on the financial aid radar.
$55,000 is a lot of money for their family. Because their dad is a policeman and mom is a teacher. Technically, on paper, they make enough money to pay $55,000 a year, but that's a huge amount of their disposable income. So they can't actually pay it.
Racial diversity today is just a piece of the overall diversity picture. From the addition of girls to a much more extensive international population, Lawrenceville is a far different campus than the one Darrell and Lyles walked onto in 1964.
The fact that 2 of the last 3 school presidents were African American, to me, meant a lot. But what meant the most was that it didn't mean a lot to the kids.
The confluence of many cultures and nationalities has made it a much more diverse school. In fact, 45% of the students are non-white, and 14% of the students are not from the U.S. Still, Chelsea Anasi and Wesley Williams, leaders of the Alliance of Black Cultures in 2013, believe more could be done to advance the diversity agenda.
I don't feel like our community fully utilizes the diversity and embraces the diversity we have.
I don't think Lawrenceville is doing enough to really, emphasize that we need to understand this. We need to, get to know what's going on in our community, what's going on in the world around us. We're doing a lot better than we used to, but we can definitely go further with that.
One of our major focuses has been on actually the majority, not the minority. What we've been trying to do is to help all students and all faculty at Lawrenceville understand issues of race. And sometimes those of us who are in the majority, the white majority, it's hardest for us to understand those issues because they're not so much a factor in our lives day to day. So we've done a number of programs around that effort.
Thanks to these programs, Lawrenceville has made great strides in diversifying the student body and building a culture of inclusion. And the school is now redoubling efforts to diversify the faculty. In every way, the school has made tremendous changes over the past 50 years. But perhaps the greatest change was triggered by a handful of teenage African-American boys 50 years ago. What is remarkable is that despite the tremendous challenges they faced, today they are glad they made the journey.
Yeah, even though it was difficult, I think it was a good experience.
I feel very fortunate to have had the experience of being able to attend Lawrenceville, and I feel even more fortunate to have been one of the first. I'll tell Darrell I was here first because I was here a week early. But anyway.
At the end of the day, we changed Lawrenceville forever and it changed us forever.
Yeah, a lot of memories in here. As a trustee since 2001 and as vice president of the board since 2013, Darrell exemplifies that change.
I want to believe in my heart everybody gained as a result of that. It was a win-win for everybody. I could never give back to the school what it's done for me.
So what might diversity look like in 50 years?
I would love to see Lawrenceville be a place that on the one hand is colorblind, and what I mean by that is that everybody is accepted and valued for who they are, regardless of what their skin color is. And on the other hand, I'd like for it to be colorful. I'd like people to really embrace each other's difference and diversity.
I don't think it should be, wow, 50 years, that's great. I think it should be, wow, it's 150 years without them. Let's not let that happen again. Let's not let our school forget what the next frontier is, what the next equity issue is. Let's always be that school.